We're going to be joined now by former White House Chief of Staff and Senior Advisor at Bondi Partners, Mick Mulvaney. Mick, welcome back to the U.S. Report. We are 1 week on from President Trump's tariff announcement, but the shock waves are still being felt. And I want to talk about what's going on inside the White House with you. I spoke a moment ago with Charles Gasparino about it, but I want to ask you about Peter Navarro, who is currently also in the middle of a rift, not just with Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, but also with Elon Musk saying that Navarro is dumber than a sack of bricks. What's going on here behind the scenes in the Trump White House, and are the trade hawks now on the way out?
Yeah, look, James, it's always good to see you. Peter's tough to work with. I worked with him in the first iteration of the Trump administration, and he's really difficult to work with. Not a real great team player, and it doesn't surprise me that he's rubbing a lot of people wrong in the West Wing. But that being said, he's a trusted advisor to the president. To the second half of your question, though, that's the more important one. He is losing sort of influence. I think that the trade hawks, so let's put it this way, the folks who saw tariffs as an end to themselves, that wanted to put tariffs on and leave them forever, and that's Peter Navarro's case, they are clearly losing influence inside the Oval Office with the President of the United States. I think what Howard Lutnick has done is sort of change the balance. He was with Navarro last week. This week, he's now aligned with Scott Bessent, who took a more nuanced view to tariffs as a means to have leverage to negotiate trade deals. And that movement, I think, of Lutnick from one camp to the other, as Charlie laid out, probably has a big impact in what Trump is thinking. So, yeah, I think we'll be hearing more from Scott Bessent, just as much from Howard Lutnick, and not as much from Peter Navarro in the coming days.
Yeah, so does this mean then that this trade war now focuses pretty much entirely on China? And does that mean that countries like Australia, where we're broadcasting here, might get off the hook of their 10% tariffs? Because I have heard that it was Navarro who torpedoed any thought of letting Australia off the hook.
I heard the same thing. Look, it was Navarro who fought me back in 2017, 2018, when I was fighting for the Australian exemption, because the steel we buy from the folks down there, we can't get domestically, and all we were doing is increasing prices on ourselves, and our military was using most of the steel that we bought from Australia. So it made sense to give Australia an exemption back in 2017, 18. Navarro never liked that, and he fought it hard here in Trump 2.0. I think you're going to see a more nuanced view. You're going to see deals being cut. You're going to see that Scott Bessent, I understand, was meeting with various delegations from around the world today down at Treasury. That will go forward. That being said, James, and this bears, I think, repeating again and again, China is different. There are geopolitical reasons for the tariffs on China. We're not looking at that as just an economic sort of endeavor. So the tariffs on Australia, Canada, Mexico, the EU are one thing. The tariffs on China are their own thing. I don't see it as a trade war with anybody except possibly China.
Yeah, and I just want to talk about the American-Australian alliance at the moment, because Australia's been getting a lot of support on Capitol Hill. Have a listen to Democrat Mark Warner, who was questioning White House trade negotiator Jamieson Greer. Have a listen to this.
We have a trade surplus with Australia. We have a free trade agreement. Why? They are an incredibly important national security partner. Why were they whacked with a tariff?
Senator, despite the agreement, they ban our beef, they ban our pork, they're getting ready to impose measures on our digital companies.
With your Greek letter formula, the fact that we have a trade surplus.
Now, it got really heated, but this seemed to me, Mick, to be evidence to me that on both sides of the aisle, because there's been also reports the Republicans aren't happy about this as well, that the U.S. alliance with Australia is actually quite strong. And some of this rhetoric that we've been hearing about here in Australia, that, these tariffs mean, America has insulted an ally and all of this sort of thing, that's fairly overblown, I would say. What do you reckon?
Well, it is. Come back to Peter Navarro. He was the one who went on television. And one of my greatest successes when I was chief of staff was keeping Peter Navarro off of television for 9 months. He goes on and calls Australia a bunch of dumpers, right? And that's a terrible thing to say about one of your closest allies. Look, Mark Warner's in the other party. I get that, but he's not wrong. And that was the exact reason that we gave exemptions for Australian steel and aluminum back in the first version of the Trump administration. So, yeah, it is a bipartisan thing here in Washington, D.C. Hopefully now that sort of the balance of power inside the West Wing has changed to where we're going to take a more nuanced, more even dare I say it, professional view of things, and not sort of the knee-jerk, Neanderthal sort of protectionism that Peter Navarro represents, that maybe we'll get things back on track. And with these trade tariffs will actually, the tariff program will actually do what a lot of us want it to do, which is help level the playing field between us and the rest of the world. It's already pretty level between us and Australia.
Yeah, and I mean, Mick, this is a really interesting thing to me here, because it is so clearly, and it has clearly been from the start, this is about breaking the system that China has been using of currency manipulation, of mercantilism, of abusing its trade surplus, abusing intellectual property, and on down the line. I mean, when you take Trump out of the equation, this problem would have still existed. We would still have this problem with China in the United States, and it would only get worse. So in a sense, I mean, what Trump is doing is crazy brave, but there's nobody else in the political class who seem to have any appetite for taking on this relationship because, oh, well, it might spook markets or it might do this. And it seemed to me like until now, Washington had been on a kind of a collision course with a brick wall on this one.
Yeah, well, back up about 4 years during the 2020 campaign, when Joe Biden was running against then-President Donald Trump, and he was attacking Donald Trump for putting a lot of the tariffs on China during the campaign. Oh, it raised the cost of living, et cetera, et cetera. It's bad for business. It's bad for markets, et cetera. Then when Biden wins, he leaves most of the same tariffs on, doesn't do any more, doesn't take the next step, which, by the way, there would have been support for in this town, because antipathy towards China is one of the few bipartisan things in Washington, D.C. right now, but left those on, and then but doesn't do anything additional. Then Trump comes back in and takes the next step, which a lot of people support. I support. Look, I've been very critical of a lot of the tariff program. I've been critical of sort of taking the meat cleaver to the system and insulting some of our friends. I don't think that's long-term beneficial to us. But I'm very supportive of what we're doing in China. I think we might end up doing more, and I would support that as well. There was a leading commentator here on TV this week saying he thought tariffs should be 400% on China because it's the only way they're ever going to change. Until China starts acting like a first world nation, like a leading nation of the world, like an open sort of government, and not like an old-fashioned communist dictatorship, you have to treat them like a communist dictatorship. And I think that's where the Trump White House is and is going to stay.
Mick, was it naive for both sides of politics to support China coming into the WTO? I'm talking about 20, even 30 years ago, and say, oh, well, they'll just become more liberal if we liberalize trade.
Yeah, there was a consensus here back in the late 90s. Go back to the Clinton administration. Not blaming Clinton for this, but there's plenty of blame to go around, where a lot of people thought that more globalized trade, especially with China, would be good for American GDP and good for American jobs. They got it half right. It was pretty good for GDP, and our shirts got cheaper, our socks got cheaper, and we devastated the middle class. So I think, yeah, we certainly made some mistakes. There's Republicans and Democrats to blame for that. The question is not now who's to blame. The question is who's going to fix it. And I think despite the choppy sort of rollout they had on this tariff plan this week, and believe me, it's more than just choppy. I don't mean to minimize what happened in the markets this week. Donald Trump's head is on right when it comes to dealing with China.
Well, they did get a bit yippy, those markets there. Mick Mulvaney, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.